in a simplified version of what we are now. I think we kind of we think about our urban work as more is good. You know, we have to do more about everything. We don't have to do better buildings. We have to do better buildings, better parks, better parking lots, better schools, better everything. And these things quite often are conceived as contrasting interest, but I think in my mind, they actually are, they have a necessity of being inclusive of each other and support each other. So it's like a synergy about all the things that can happen. And there is no small action and big action. There is just a direction of travel or momentum. I'm going to repeat a lot of the stuff you said, I just don't say. And that's kind of our role. And specifically in Tirana, I am Italian. I have lived in a lot of places in Europe. I had won this project as a director or principal at Grimshaw Architects. It was based in London, so my experience was in London. And as you can imagine, it's a very different environment. The mindset is very analytical, it's diagrammatic, and things like that. So the first thing we had to do was to kind of engage with the idea that life has a different vibe in every place that we work, actually, but especially with that kind of distance. And so I don't have to explain you the vibe of Tirana because you live here, but it took a while for us to learn, and it was a real effort. It's not really an effort that you expect designer to, it's not written on our contract. Learn how do people live and where do they buy bread and how long it takes them to go to school. And so what was written in our contract was to make maps. So we went around, tried to kind of supercharge our life experience in Tirana as much as possible and then make maps or plans or hybrid elements between maps and plans just to make sense, and so that when these things are like summaries of what we learned that help us then generate optimal opportunities and solutions and propositions. Out of that, and really focusing on the idea that the humanity of the city, despite all the challenges that we encountered. I mean, I'm just going to ask you a small mindful exercise. This project for me started December 17, 2011, right? Very rainy, cold day, where I came with all the other competitors of this competition to Tirana, and we were kind of, we had a crash course in what it meant to be here. And it was a very different place. I'm sure if you all think back then, some of you were kindergarten probably, but I mean, you know, I had more hair and I was thinner, so that was great. But, you know, it was all different environment. So first, I think everybody has to be proud of a place that is able to enact change, because it isn't easy, right? And it's a struggle, and it's dirty, and it's noisy, and it makes a mess, but it is the only thing we can do to improve our collective existence. And so out of all that, we kind of extracted a bunch of things, and these actually got pretty much written out in more or less this form on the plane back, that well before the competition at that point. And they became our guiding principle, and they're very loose ideas. They're not like specific, you can't put a price or a program to any of this. But they're very important things to create what I call like the resilience of an idea, right? So our job was to kind of generate a vision of some kind that contained all the actions that were necessary that we could think of, and also all the other stuff that we could not think of, because some things grow out of neighborhood engagement, some things grow out of opportunity, some things grow out of political change, they grow out of you know, natural disasters, things like that. There is all sorts of stuff that have actually happened in here. And so, back to maps, because that's what we do. I say very often that if I can't draw something, it means I don't really understand it. So the first thing is that we redrew the city and kind of try to understand the form of it in our eyes. And architects, I guess a bunch of you are architects, we kind of have a very clear understanding of something that's very, very abstract. And so a lot of my work is to make sure that I don't forget that things are real, even though I can draw them as a plan or as a section. And so this is what we found. It was a city that had its own dynamic, its own challenges, its own grandeur, and it had a big gap at the top there. for all sorts of reasons. I'm not going to go into it because otherwise we'll be here all night. And our job was to basically give it an opportunity, shape the potential for change. And that's what our objective was. How do we do that? We did it by being curious and observant. So we did come back a lot, and we kind of studied cadastre maps when we found them. I don't have to explain here how challenging it is to understand property situations in the city, but that was a very important thing. So very quickly we identified there were a bunch of challenges, or constraints as we call it, that were things that defined the battles, if you want. And then there was a whole lot of stuff that defined opportunity, and actually there were a lot more. But if you don't engage with them both, then opportunities are just good ideas. And the world is full of good ideas, but from a good idea to an implementation, that's the challenge. And so here, very simply, one of the key things that drive the form making and I think the resilience and the opportunity building of our plan was to learn how the city existed in its, let's call it informal presence in that particular sector of the city, and how it actually functioned as a very vibrant city with all the challenges and things, but it was full of people and full of activity and things. And what can we learn from that, and what can we overlay, and how we can generate improvement and density to make sure that that same amount of space can contain more life, therefore be more efficient for services, economies, communities and stuff, than a more kind of informal suburban density, which is what we found. And this is kind of simple, but in essence, we mapped all the roads, we abstracted an ideal network that merged into the rest of the city network, and then we morphed it to make sure that all the new roads were extension of existing roads. I mean, we call them roads, so I guess if those of you that have been in the area, the roads is a loose kind of term. And that became a very simple, resilient principle to auto-transform a very large piece of land, because we're talking about almost 1.5 kilometers square of pretty much inner city land, which is an unusual kind of size. So that was a very important thing, but that's a micro scale. So the other things for having plans that have to survive 20, 25 years is you have to have something that's very large and is very adaptable, and it contains a whole lot of things. And so we kind of split it into this 3 macro diagram, which evolve with clarity of urban function. And in this case, the boulevard was the driving axis, so the extension of it created a formal representation of how the city thought of itself, which we extended in line with the urban history of the city. An efficiency of a mobility network with all the challenges that comes, but making sure that it's possible for public transport to exist rather than just make roads. And just roads, I mean, as an anecdote, my Swiss mentor always said, you want traffic, build roads. And that's contradictory, but it kind of stuck with me. And then having this idea of a distributed assets of public spaces. And again, here is grab what you can type of approach. So because the roads weren't straight, there was a lot of awkward corner, and the planning, the footprint between roads shifts allowed for a lot of public spaces. And we integrated that with a larger vision of a central park, so a space in the middle is about 100,000 meters square at this full construction, which will be delivered through a public-private synergy, so it's a challenge in itself, but that's the vision. The river, which I'll point to in a minute, and at the time we were engaging with the extension beyond the boundary of the city into the possibility of an idea of a park near the Pascuchan Lake over the hill, which then kind of fall out for things. But so in essence, then we reduced this idea to 2 main moves: the boulevard, the river, and their associated public spaces. And we were lucky enough that in the journey of this project, back to this continuum, right? We learned from what was there before, I mean, the Italian plan here and the communist extension of the boulevard. At the time, Skanderberg Square and all the initial master plan that the Prime Minister enacted when he was mayor were emerging, the French plan, the colors, the Scanebe Square project, and then halfway through our project, the Tirana 2030 plan by UN Lab and Studio Boeri emerged, so we had to embrace that. They kind of borrowed a whole bunch of our stuff, as it should be, and when they formulated the larger metropolitan plan, we then kind of complied to their vision, which was at that point an evolved, a kind of layered vision of the different scales. And so these elements kind of gave us the opportunity to enact two projects, which I'm going to go through very quickly, because hopefully you've been to see them, so I don't really have to explain, which were actually building projects. And oddly, Grimshaw is a kind of a geeky place. We did a lot of infrastructure projects and transport, mobility and things, and so we got the chance to design a road, which at the office, everybody teased me because it was the shortest building we've ever made. Because the full elevation is maximum a bench, it's about 80 centimeters, right? When you build big airports, normally you talk about hundreds of meters. So that was fun. But it's the Boulevard, which was a built project, it's enacted there, and the restoration of the riverbed, which in essence was a flood protection project. But that in itself for us was the opportunity to give the city the chance to have a very, very big park along a very beautiful, manageable waterway, water system. And then we kind of put all these things together to create a plan, and hopefully here we'll see what I mean by more and more and more. There is more roads because people have to move. I didn't go into detail here, but we have about 20 different road types which are allocated to all these things to ensure that parking is controlled and there is trees everywhere and there are different sections and etc. There is a distribution of green, both private, so inner block, and public in the corners, as well as kind of main big public spaces, which on the boulevard are these 4 squares and the river square and a kind of a long linear garden that we managed to inbuild into this big road, which I hope you agree is quite successful. And that also comes along with pedestrian roads and all sorts of different places. So there's a various array, mostly because to build a 100,000 meter square park is a challenge, but to build an 80 meter square corner space with a cafe is a lot less of a problem. And so realistically, you can kind of multiply your chances to generate positive public space, showcase that it's possible, and therefore incentivize people to want more of it, which makes it easier to tell them that they have to build it and get rid of cars. I think, if I got it right, that's a bit of what you mean by momentum. So that we ended up with this. So there's more development, more density of everything, of buildings, of life, of public space. And of course, as much as I don't like plans, there are rules in the world, which means that we had to comply with all these diverse systems to generate a system that offers the city a governance structure, which we call manuals, and a clarity for the investors, which are the standardized urban plan systems that you'd expect to see. This happened twice, so there is a big book which hopefully is not a coffee table book. It's thought as a manual for people that work in the city to help them negotiate good projects. That's what we want it to be, right? And there's a book that contains the vision of the whole master plan, which has a lifespan of minimum 10 years and a lot of things that can change in it. And then there are 45 smaller manuals, because the second phase of this work was to actually design in detail all the areas that compose this space, which you will see later. And now very quickly, because then I will want to invite you, or someone else will invite you to enjoy the beautiful exhibition we prepared. The boulevard is a long road. It needed to be there for a kind of a political dream, an urban dream. And we planted as many trees as we could. And we reduced the roadways as much as we can. And most importantly, we had this very, very simple idea, which is even on a big road, which is 70 meters wide and 2 kilometers long, cars do not run the show, right? People that walk there do not ever have to walk down into the road. But it's the opposite. It's the cars that have to drive over pedestrian space. And if you have driven up there, and probably you find it quite annoying because we made very steep bits where the tarmac turns into a stone paved area, which kind of tells cars that this is not really all yours, you just kind of pay attention. And traffic lights allow you to crisscross these 70-meter wide spaces as it's your space, as a pedestrian, as a person with a pram, as a cyclist, and things like that. And that is a very simple thing, but it is quite impactful. And at the time, this got finished, I think, in about 2018. We were very happy because it was a space that people embraced, right? And to begin with, it was also a road that didn't really go anywhere, so the road was also for people. Now, as the place evolved, there are more traffic spaces and stuff, but you can tell the kind of the sunset side, so the eastern side, is a 2-kilometer long linear park, which varies between 20 and 30 meter wide. And on the other side, there's a reservation for a tram or a light city rail, which hopefully is coming into and it will take us very quickly without traffic to the airport, which will be great, and a cycle lane. And all the side roads don't go into the main road. So this also, in the future confirmation, slows down the traffic from the neighborhood. They don't go into the boulevard, they go in and out, so they access the shops and things, but they don't create traffic. The other thing which we found was this, River Tirana. So when I asked, does Tirana have a river? Everybody brought me to the Lana River, and very few people knew that there was a river called Tirana up at the dead end of town, which when I went to visit, it was quite a challenge because there was a lot of dogs that chased me, right? So, and you know, it was a big investment, but we basically reformed all the riverbed for about, originally it was 8 kilometers, then we extended to about 14 kilometers, and we created paper maps of flood protection layers, and that we enacted the first layer, which was the land we had available, and the other ones will enact as the city will grow. But I asked people to check. I think that since we built this, the times that the river created problems into the informal settlements around is actually drastically diminished. So I think it happened maybe once in the last 10 years that's been built. And this kind of offers the opportunity of this, which is, you know, there will be a river, it will be managed. It is conceived as a, we will call it now, nature-driven solution. At the time it was geoengineering because we're a bit more geeky. But it gives the opportunity to have a system that allows the city to grow on a new asset, which potentially is 800,000 meter squares of greenery and water. So it's not an insignificant amount, which when Tirana will grow to that size and stuff, it will be a mega asset for it, possibly linked to the ring of trees that is now being embedded into the big urban plan. And this is to tell you that, to give a bit of engagement, we mapped all the things that have happened in the master plan, all the permissions that have been given from the city and from Dageteur for different buildings, and we just built it in Google Earth, in interactive things, which is, you guys can have some fun and try it out. Every building is mapped, so you can click on it, actually has a picture of the beautiful architecture that's going to emerge in the city. And what I'm the most proud of is that, sure, the boulevard is a showcase place, so there will be a lot of incredible buildings by incredible architects. But a lot of other parts of the master plan, and surprisingly, but very happily, from my point of view, that have been built first, are affordable houses, maybe not the scale of social activity yet, but are houses where people live, and that are schools that people send their kids to. And that part is emerging out of this, and that makes me very happy for the city, but also because I must have gotten something right, which always makes people feel happy. So, thank you very much, and